and the reason that he voted for you is because you're a decent man.
Over the weekend was the White House Correspondents Dinner, where a bunch of press come together with the White House and have a party. Now, this is usually pretty embarrassing, except for often, not always, but often, the headlining comedian does a great job at exposing some real truths through their satire, their comedy. I think back to Stephen Colbert when he was the headliner for George W. Bush. Larry Wilmore as well did a great job when Obama was in the White House. But this year was a little more different. It was embarrassing, and in some ways you could argue it was disturbing. So I'm going to share a couple of clips, one from the headliner of the event, but also from Joe Biden himself, and just completely ignoring the moment that the White House is currently in. This gets to the serious issue that was ignored throughout the night, and that is the ongoing bombardment and ethnic cleansing of Gaza by the far right-wing Israeli government that is currently being backed by the U.S. government. This gets to a boycott that was issued by a series of journalists. So from Common Dreams here, Israel's assault on Gaza, which has been fueled by U.S. weapons and diplomatic support, is the deadliest conflict for journalists in decades. Last year, roughly 75% of the journalists killed globally were killed by Israeli forces. This gets to the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate calling for a boycott of the event in an attempt to try and get journalists not to show up. The National Writers Union backed this, saying, "We support the call of the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate to boycott tomorrow's White House Correspondents' Dinner. More than 100 journalists and media workers have been killed in the past 6 months of Israel's war on Gaza, backed by the U.S. government." As PJS writes, quote, "By standing in solidarity with Palestinian journalists, we uphold the principles of press freedom and human rights that are fundamental to our profession. As a union of journalists and media workers who strive for truth, we refuse to normalize genocide, stand with journalists in Gaza, and amplify the call for a boycott." This was also backed by the International Federation of Journalists that represent over 600,000 media workers worldwide. Writing here, USA, the IFJ supports the call to boycott the White House Correspondents' Dinner tonight. More than 100 journalists and media workers have been killed in the past 6 months of Israel's war on Gaza, backed by the U.S. government. Mehdi Hassan also came out to support this. He's, as he says here, "I've attended the White House Correspondents' Dinner for the past 2 years. I decided not to attend today's dinner, which, to be clear, is hosted by D.C. journalists, not the White House, in solidarity with under fire Palestinian journalists in Gaza who have called for a boycott." And then this great quote here really contextualizes it. "To sit and schmooze with the president while he sends billions of dollars in weapons to Israel to kill their colleagues in Gaza is unethical and immoral," said Sandra Tamari, executive director of Adala Justice Project, which helped organize the letter calling for a boycott of Saturday's dinner. Quote, "To dine with him as he allows Palestinians to die of starvation by cutting off funding to critical humanitarian aid is despicable." Yet, a lot of the press appeared not to care, as they were there, having a good time, chilling with the White House. This gets to the speech. Now, if you want to show up and give a critical speech, as we've seen, as I said, with Stephen Colbert, for example, then great. You're going there to push human rights, to discuss real issues, to not just have a good time. Then that is a good use of people's time. And that is what your responsibility is to here. Your responsibility as the person giving this speech here is not to the president. Your responsibility is to society, is to human rights, is to the spirit of what journalists should be doing. Yet, you're going to see, this is how Colin Jost ends the speech, and I find this completely embarrassing. This is, I'm going in mid-sentence here because it's a much longer clip, but he's talking about his grandfather who recently passed away, and his grandfather's last vote was for Joe Biden.
He voted for you, and the reason that he voted for you is because you're a decent man. My grandpa voted for decency, and decency is why we're all here tonight. Decency is how we're able to be here tonight. And when you look at the levels of freedom throughout history and even around the world today, this is the exception. This freedom is incredibly rare, and the journalists in this room help protect that freedom, and we cannot ever take that for granted.
Just a very bizarre few sentences there. One about the decency, we'll come back to that. And then about how, this freedom is incredibly rare. Yeah, made even more rare by the fact that the U.S. government that you are speaking to right there, that you are representing, that you are defending, is currently funding a genocide in Gaza. Look, I get the decency comments when compared to Donald Trump, who has no decency, personal decency, has no decency when it comes to his overt racism and xenophobia. I get those differences there. But we are in a moment right now where this U.S. government, this White House, is supporting the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. To say any of this in that context, in the context of what is currently going on, is at the very least embarrassing. I'm going to get to a clip from Biden as well that goes to the same issue, but it's worth pointing out what this White House right now is doing. They're reportedly working to stop the International Criminal Court from issuing an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, even though let's be clear, because of the power that Israel has, well, because of the U.S., it's very unlikely there's going to be any serious consequences for Netanyahu. But he apparently behind the scenes is worried that the ICC may come after him, worried for good reason, meaning he knows what he is doing. And the U.S. is working to defend him from any potential fallout from his actions. And keeping in mind, Netanyahu is a good friend of Trump. He wants Trump to win the next election. He is loving what Biden's doing right now because it's hurting Biden's poll numbers. It's both helping him because it's not leading to any real consequences for the Israeli government, but it's also helping Trump. And of course, it's backed by Speaker Mike Johnson, absolute lunatic Republican Speaker Mike Johnson, saying the ICC should stand down on this immediately. So he's also defending Netanyahu here, right along with Joe Biden. Now, while this is going on, it's not as if the Biden White House is unaware of what Israel's doing and unaware of their bullshit. Leaked State Department memo, Israeli assurances, quote, neither credible nor reliable. The U.S. government knows that Israel lies again and again and again and again. A newly leaked internal memo shows that officials at 4 U.S. State Department bureaus don't believe the Israeli government's assurances that it is using American weaponry in Gaza in compliance with international law, rejecting them as, quote, neither credible nor reliable. The leaked document raises serious concern over non-compliance with international law, specifically citing the Israeli military's repeated attacks on civilian infrastructure, refusal to investigate or punish those responsible for atrocities, and killing of, quote, humanitarian workers and journalists at an unprecedented rate, according to Reuters. This is what is going on. The U.S. government is aware of what the Israeli government is doing, yet they continue funding them and supplying weapons. And we're concerned about how decent Joe Biden is. This is the main focus of the White House Correspondents Dinner speech. I'm going to end on this. This is also, of course, absurd.
And some of your colleagues have given their lives, and many have suffered grievous injuries. Other reporters have lost their freedom. Journalism is clearly not a crime, not here, not there, not anywhere in the world. And Putin should release Evan and also immediately. We're doing everything we can to bring home journalists, fellow journalists, Austin, and all Americans like Paul Whelan, who wrongfully detained all around the world. And I give you my orders to Biden. We're not going to give up until we get them home. All of them. All of them.
This really goes to how empty all of this is. If you are an ally of the U.S. government, as Israel is, then you're not going to get a mention in this entire piece about how dangerous it is to be a journalist, how there are these journalists all over the world that are risking their lives. In Russia, he brings up how there's 2 journalists jailed. Yet, over 100 journalists killed by the right-wing Israeli government doesn't deserve a mention. Because again, this is all just spectacle. It's all just playing pretend. Israel's an ally, so they do not care.